Whenever the topic of money comes up at church, people always ask me, gosh, don't you hate talking about money at church? And actually, my answer is no. As a matter of fact, my two favorite things to talk about in church are money and sex. And here's why. Whenever you talk about either one of those things, people really listen, right? So, the reason that happens around money is because money really hits us right where our heart is. It touches the deepest part of ourselves. It reveals our desires, our motivations, our priorities. If we're going to think about new life, we have to think about this. So, let's think about it for a minute. What is important to you? If you really thought about it, what are your priorities? You know, we all swim in this cultural sea of the American dream, the California dream, sun-tinged affluence and prosperity. The whimsical idea of what would we do if we had $1 million engages us because it speaks to something deep within us. What are your priorities? And this morning, are they what you want them to be? I think all of us, no matter who we are or what we believe, long for something because God has wired into us a desire for something better. It's part of being human. And the topic of money brings all of that up. There's a twinge inside of us that doesn't exactly feel at home with the world the way it is. It's that thing that drives us to create something better. It's that thing that our artists write and paint and sing about. It's the reason we wrestle with priorities. It's the reason we pursue money. So if you've experienced that twinge, that there must be something better. This morning, we're going to look at something that offers quite a lot of help. See, Jesus had something to say about priorities. He once gave a talk that described his definitive picture of the spiritual life. This is what it looks like to live life with God. In about 15 minutes, the talk no longer than 15 minutes, he shared insights so powerful that 2,000 years later, we're still talking about them. That talk is recorded in Matthew 5-7 and is commonly referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. And in it, Jesus spoke directly to this issue of priorities and money. It's inside of your program if you want to look at this scripture passage we're going to read through together. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. Here's what Jesus says. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And in many translations, money is capitalized here, and we're going to get back to why that's the case. But let's talk about this passage. Let's talk about how Jesus says that our priorities are formed, because that's really what this passage is about. So we're going to talk about several ways that Jesus says our passions and our priorities are formed. And on the way, we're going to see that he gives us some very practical and very encouraging help. So first of all, Jesus says in this passage that our priorities are formed by our affections. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be. Now, this is counterintuitive. It's the opposite of the way we normally think about this. Jesus says that rather than our affections creating our actions actually create our affections, right? We think of it the other way. Like, if I care about these things and I do these things, then that'll happen. But Jesus says, no, it's actually the opposite. Our heart is formed by what we pay attention to. So it turns out that what we would buy if we actually had $1 million to spend is really quite important. And it turns out that we might not be as far away from that as you might think. According to the World Bank, the richest people, the 1% of wealth on our planet, lies in the hands of people who make, are you ready? $34,000 a year or better. That's the 1%. It takes only $34,000 a year to be in the 1% of global wealth. And here's another way of thinking about it. If you make $34,000 a year, if that was all you made over the average career span of a person, you will have made well over $1 million. So you can multiply it out if you're making more than that. So the question, what will you do with $1 million, is actually a real one. And here's some more stats for you. Did you know that the 12% of us who live in Western Europe and North America are responsible for 60% of global private consumption? Or that if everyone on the planet had the same ecological footprint as the average American, it would take 4 to 7 Earths to sustain us? Did you know that in 6 months, only 1% of what the average person buys is actually still in use? 99% of it on the way to the landfill. So friends, in thinking about our affections, we can't sort of look at other people and go, well, good thing I'm not a materialist like them. There's an interesting play on words in the Greek in the beginning of this passage where it literally says, do not treasure up your treasures. That's what it literally says. It gives the picture of seeking treasure upon treasure. And to show you where my highly trained theological mind went when I saw this, what happened to me is immediately I thought of this picture. Right? What's he doing here? Scrooge McDuck. Stacking treasure upon treasure upon treasure, right? He just sits in there and counts it. Right? And this is important because the picture we get in Scripture is not that wealth in and of itself is bad. Actually, it's not at all. But if our priority is to stack up treasure upon treasure upon treasure for ourselves, then we have what many people would call a disordered attachment or a disordered affection. What that means is that try as we might, we will not find satisfaction for that twinge in that way. I mean, just think about it again on a very simple level. Scrooge McDuck is not a happy character, right? There's a reason for that. British scholar John Stott says this: what Jesus forbids his followers is the selfish accumulation of goods. The hard-heartedness that does not feel the colossal need of the world's underprivileged people, the foolish fantasy that a person's life consists in the abundance of their possessions, and the materialism that tethers our hearts to the earth. I love that line, the materialism that tethers our hearts to the earth. So what if we don't want to be tethered to the earth? What if we want our priorities to be different in this regard? What if we really want to begin to care about the things that God cares about? Then the solution is simple. We begin to invest in those things. Where our treasure is, there our heart will be. When we invest in God's kingdom, it moves our hearts towards his kingdom. Now, here's a good way of thinking about this. For years, I never had anything, invested in the stock market. As a matter of fact, and as a result of that, I never paid any attention to, all those things. Like be sitting in the car and on the radio, they say, the Dow Jones Industrials today, and I'd be like, blah, 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 blah. Like it didn't mean anything to me, right? Why? Because I had no treasure there. But a few years back, with my huge, pastoral investment capabilities, I decided that I was going to jump into the stock market with both feet, and so I bought 5 whole shares of Apple stock, right? Which I sold at a loss a few months later, which is a whole other story, and it tells me why I'm not so good at this. But anyway, when I had them, all of a sudden, when I'd hear the Dow Jones Industrials, I'd be like, oh yeah, what's that? Like, I'm checking my phone, I'm watching the little ticker all the time. I want to see how that stock is doing. Why? Because I had some treasure there, right? My activity led my affections. Sometimes I hear people tell me they just don't feel much affection in their engagement with God. They'll often describe this as being on a spiritual plateau. They'll be like, I'm just kind of stuck. I don't feel like I've moved anywhere, and I just don't know what to do. And they have this kind of malaise or this spiritual acedia, which is what many people call it. Well, let me suggest something to you. Maybe the breakthrough to your spiritual plateau is only going to come when you invest yourself in the work of God. Your affections follow your actions, right? Here's the thing. Usually when we reach some kind of spiritual plateau, we tend to try to solve it through input. I need to read this book, or I need to get, more teaching, or I need to get the right answer. Again, nothing wrong with that, but here's the thing. I think very often it's not more input that's going to help us. It's output. Maybe that's the breakthrough that you need to move your affections forward. This passage clearly shows our actions will create our affections, which will create our priorities. So that's Jesus' first point here. Then in verse 22 and 23, he gives us a second picture of how our priorities are formed. And it's actually kind of strange. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Now here's the thing. I'm reading along in the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm grooving with it and tracking with it, and all of a sudden this thing pops up, and it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. You have to think about it. So here's the thing. If he's talking about priorities, and the first part of this idea is sort of, your affections, this part, the eye is the lamp of the body, is about your vision. It's about your perspective. How do you see things? Perspective is key in developing our priorities, financial or otherwise. Again, there's some interesting language here. The word good, referring to the eye, is actually a word which literally means clear and has the connotation of generosity. The phraseology used around bad here is often used as a figure of speech in Jewish tradition that could roughly be translated as the evil eye. So we have a choice here between clear vision that leads to a life of generosity or the evil eye, which is a Jewish idiom for saying stingy. That's what Jesus is talking about here. He's saying that in terms of your priorities, your outlook determines your outcome. When it comes to setting our priorities, our vision, our perspective is everything. The story is told of a prosperous young investment banker who was driving his new BMW on a mountain road during a snowstorm. And as he veered around one sharp turn, he lost control and the car began sliding down towards a deep precipice. And as it started to slide down, it was like something out of a James Bond movie. He unclipped himself and threw himself out of the car just as the car went rolling down the ravine and then burst into flames. A trucker who was behind him saw the accident and stopped and found the banker by the side of the road looking down the ravine, sobbing, "My BMW, my BMW." And the trucker pointed at the man's shoulder and he said, "You've got bigger problems than that. You've lost your arm. We need to call an ambulance." And the man looked down at his shoulder for the first time, realized his arm was gone and yelled, "My Rolex." Yeah, I'm so embarrassed that I actually just told that story, but you get the idea, right? Perspective is everything. It's just like the Sean Parker quote to Mark Zuckerberg that we showed earlier. You know what's cool? Not $1 million, $1 billion. The thing is, it never stops. So how do we shift our perspective? Here's a true story. A good friend of mine who lives in San Francisco a while back decided to start a small group, but he was kind of tired of the typical thing, and so he decided he wanted to do this a little differently. He was tired of the group where, you've been to this group. You go and you sit in a circle and somebody asks a really obvious question and then nobody wants to answer it because it's too obvious, and then finally somebody answers it and then you have coffee and you go home, right? You've been in that group. He was like, I don't want to do that anymore. So he gathered together a group of people to do something different. He gathered them together for 8 weeks, and he said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have this small group, and it's going to be about finances. And there's nothing that draws people into a small group like finances, right? But here's what he did. He said, okay, so for the next 8 weeks, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give away half of our stuff. And they came back the second week, and the people in the group went, yeah, we're not doing that. And so he goes, okay, well, how about this? How about this next week, you go through your closet and you get rid of half the stuff that's in your closet. You can probably do that. Half the stuff in your closet, your drawer, you don't wear them anyway, right? So let's go that first this week. So they did that, and they came back that week, and they began studying passages on contentment and on generosity, on those kinds of things in the scriptures. And then next week they got together, he said, I tell you, let's try this week. How about we give away half of our electronics, right? You probably have like an old cassette player or a CD Walkman somewhere that you don't use anymore. So this week, let's kind of purge of that. And they went through 8 weeks of that, giving away things in different categories. And by the time they were done, they kind of ran out of categories. So the last weeks they were like, okay, whatever you have 2 of, go through your house. Whatever you have 2 of, give away 1 of them. And then they had this big garage sale at the end and gave the money to world relief organizations. Now, while they were doing this, they were also studying passages on contentment and that sort of thing. But when the people were through with all of that, here's what they said. They said, gosh, this was the most transformational group I've ever been a part of. Why? Well, they actually wrote about it. 3 things, 3 reasons it changed them. Number 1, they said it taught us that we were part of something bigger than ourselves. Now, here's what that means. By the way, these were not wealthy people. These were young San Franciscans, like 25 to 35ish, starting their career in one of the most expensive cities in the world. So none of them had a lot of expendable income. But they said, first of all, it taught us that we were part of something bigger than ourselves. That my money is not actually my money. It's actually something bigger that God wants to do with it that affects all kinds of other people. So I'm part of something bigger in this thing. Secondly, it taught them that they had intentional choices they could make around their money. There were people in the group who, by the time the group was over, decided, you know what, I'm in this job I really don't like, but what I've realized is I don't need all of this. I could actually cut way back in terms of my expenses, and then I could go do work that's meaningful to me. And then third, just the one person's quote is great. It said, it taught me that I have enough. That's a big statement. I have enough. I can trust that I serve a God who cares for me. That doesn't mean there won't be times when, it doesn't feel difficult, or maybe you don't really know if you're going to have what you need to pay the bills or whatever it is, but this is what they learned. They said, I have enough. That's a big thing. Basically, what happened in the context of this group is it shifted their perspective. Our perspectives change, and this is really important, when we engage with God in real, specific ways. That's why Paul says in Romans 12, I urge you, therefore, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. He didn't say, this is how you think about worship. Our perspectives change through actively engaging with God. The community of faith should feel much more like a workout crew, a gym, than it should feel like a lecture hall. Practicing the way of Jesus is what changes us. Not learning more things about Jesus. So we join a group, we get involved in service, we build a daily habit of prayer, we give away our stuff. And as we do, something happens. Our vision for our life begins to shift. We begin to experience new kinds of joy and genuine contentment. And as a result, we find ourselves naturally doing the kinds of things that Jesus points us to in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. We become the kinds of people who turn the other cheek, who go the extra mile, who offer our coat as well as when someone asks for our shirt. It just happens naturally. We start to discover that God's priorities are not a struggle, they just happen for us because it's a better way of life. This is a better way to live. Our vision becomes clear. All of this leads us to a third thing. The ultimate thing here that Jesus said forms our priorities, our affections, our visions, and then finally, our master. When we get to verse 24, Jesus really lays it on the line. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon. Again, capitalized, money. It's capitalized here because Jesus is personifying it. It's not capitalized in the Greek, but it's capitalized for us because it's giving us this picture. It's like Jesus is saying, look, here's God, here's money. These are two different personalities that make a bid for your heart. Now, this either or kind of statement from Jesus is really fascinating to me because just notice how many times in the New Testament Jesus is asked an either or question and he refuses to answer it. People will come to him and say, well, what about this? Or, this woman was caught in adultery. Should we do this or should we do this? And very often people will come to him saying, it's either this or this. And Jesus will go, well, there's a third way. Jesus is the master of the third way approach. But here, the teaching is very different. It's clearly either or. And frankly, I don't know about you, but I'm usually skeptical of pastors when they give me the either or kind of sermon, right? It often seems a little simplistic or overstated for me. Whenever I hear a pastor going, well, it's either this or this, like in my mind, I'm like, So it helps me to think about what Jesus is saying here. Here's what he's saying. He's not saying that it's not a good idea to try to serve both God and money. He's not saying, well, it's not really a good idea. It's going to create problems for you. He's not even saying, I command you not to serve God and money. What he's doing here when he says you cannot serve God and money, he's just describing reality. He's saying, you know what? It just can't be done. We can no more serve both God and mammon. The Greek word actually describes here an entire lifestyle, not just money. Then we can walk in two directions at the same time. You can't do it. They're mutually exclusive. It cannot be done. And friends, the very popular compromise for us between the two, serving God sometimes, serving the American dream and others, Jesus declares here to be impossible. And here, friends, is where it really starts messing with you. If you're a follower of Jesus, here's an important question. Has Jesus or my experience of Christianity become simply a subcomponent of my overall bigger vision of life as the Southern Californian American dream? Is my faith just a part of my self-actualization? Does Jesus fit inside of my picture of the good life, or does he define it? And if he's a subcomponent of the good life for you, then who or what are you really serving? I mean, friends, what if the American dream is not Jesus's dream? Again, scholar John Stott puts it this way. Anyone who divides his allegiance between God and mammon has already given it to mammon, since God cannot be served only, or God can be served only with an entire and exclusive devotion. To try to share him with other loyalties is to have opted for idolatry. Wow. So this is a big thing. And I'm not saying we can answer it in 30 minutes of talking together here. But I do want to offer you one very practical way this morning to invest your affections, to expand your vision, to serve your master. What I generally like to call people to in terms of an overall plan for our priorities, particularly our financial priorities, is what is often called the 10-10-80 plan. Right? You've heard of this before, probably. You know, the first 10% of your income you give, the second 10% you save, and then you live off of the 80%. Right? Early in our marriage, I think we were 26 years old at the time. We were in graduate school, didn't have a lot of money. My wife and I, though, decided to do this. And friends, it's one of the best decisions we have ever made. Now, you may look at that and you may go, ooh, how am I going to do that, right? It may take you some time to get there. You may have to take some steps to it. You might have to go, okay, well, this year it's 1% up, and then the next year it's another percent. I mean, however you want to do it, you need to come up with a plan, and we're going to give you some ideas on how to do that later. But, you may not be here now, but don't let that discourage you. Let that become a goal. Start to work your way towards this. Now, on the other hand, I have some friends who are already there and who are practicing what they're now calling the graduated tithe. I love this, where they're trying to flip the picture. Over time, they've been giving more and more and living off less and less, and their hope is by the time they retire, those two things will be switched. I have a friend who's a pastor here in Los Angeles, not here, but in another place in Los Angeles. And he told me the story of this new guy who came to his church, and the guy was very wealthy, and he went through a financial sort of class with them, and the pastor was teaching it, and he came to the pastor friend, my friend afterwards, and he said, wait a minute, look, man, I make $500K a year. Are you telling me I need to give $50,000 to the church? And my friend looked at him and he said, oh, no. You need to be giving way more than that. My friend is pretty bold. Anyway, but why, right? Why would we do this? Let me just see if I can give you some vision, some motivation for this. I'm going to give you a 2-question quiz that a major market research company recently did. First question is this. If American Christians, and this was narrowly defined, this was defined as people who say faith is very important to them and attend church at least 2 times a month. So this was a smaller group, right? If American Christians were their own economy, what would their world rank be in terms of annual income among the countries of the world? Would it be 181st, 57th, 9th, or 6th? The answer is D, 6. American Christians earn more than $2.5 trillion. On their own, these people could be admitted to the G7 summit as one of the world's 7 largest economies on the planet. Number 2, if all these Christians gave away 10% of their income, we could do which of the following? A, sponsor 40 million children breaking the cycle of poverty. To give you a scale of 40 million children, that's the entire population of people in California is 35 million. B, send out 1.5 million indigenous missionaries into countries closed to outside missionaries. C, increase by 21-fold the funding of Bible translations, printing, and distribution. D, start 150 Christian colleges in Eastern Europe, South America, Africa, Southeast Asia. And the answer is E, all of the above. If American Christians, as narrowly defined here, gave 10%, it would generate, ready, an extra $50 billion per year. That is just crazy. We could end world hunger. Think of what that could do for the world. And if all of us in this room decided to go with the 10-10-80 plan, think of what we could do just for our city. And think about what it could do for you. See, here's the thing. When my wife and I started this 10-10-80 plan, it wasn't an easy choice. As a matter of fact, we struggled with it. And I remember a very specific question that I was wrestling with as I was trying to figure out how I was going to sort of create my budget around this. I was thinking of that 10% give thing. Is that like gross or net? Right? And honestly, I was struggling with this. And so I went to a spiritual mentor. And I'm like, okay, so that 10% giving thing, is that gross or net? And he looked at me and goes, well, David, I guess it depends if you want to be blessed, gross or net. I was like, dang. But here's the thing. See, what I was thinking about was, okay, how do I make sure that I follow the rule and that I do just what I have to do, instead of thinking, what is this going to do for me when I do it? That's the blessing side of it. And I can tell you from my own standpoint, after doing this for like 30-something years, you cannot outgive God. Listen, I'm a pastor. This is not like your high financial career. I'm just saying. But God has given us what we need at every moment. We've gotten to do things that I never thought we would be able to do. God has been faithful. You cannot outgive God. That is my personal testimony. Now, listen, that doesn't mean there haven't been times when we were like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen, and, the bills are coming. That's not saying those times don't happen, but I'm just saying over the long haul, this is a good thing to do for your soul. There's a great story about a millionaire who was at this small church at this meeting where the topic was giving, and feeling very proud of himself, the man stood up and said, not too many years ago, I sat in this church when I only had one coin to my name, but I believe what God said about giving, so I dropped that one coin into the basket. I put everything I had in the basket that day. I knew I had to give God all or nothing. God is faithful, and today I'm a millionaire. And he sat down, and there was this really awkward silence in the church. Until this little old woman sitting next to him looked at him and said, just loud enough for everyone else to hear, I dare you to do that again. Now, see, you may be at the very beginning of that story with, one coin to your name, or at the other side of it. You may have very little, or you may have way more than you need this morning. But either way, here's the thing. Money makes a bid for your heart like nothing else. That's why when Jesus talks about priorities, he ultimately brings it down to that issue. So if we're going to live in a new way, we have to recognize that money is not just an indicator of our priorities, it's a determiner of them. So if you want to heed that little voice inside of you that says, there must be something more, do some work with this. And to give you one final piece of motivation, just, keep reading in the Sermon on the Mount when you go home. Right after this in the Sermon on the Mount, it's really funny. Right after he talks about money, you know what Jesus talks about next? Worry. Perfect. Because he knows what talking about money can do to us. You should go read the whole thing, but it ends like this, verse 31 through 34 of chapter 6. This is from the Message translation. Jesus says, so do not worry. What I'm trying to get you to do is to relax, to not be so preoccupied with getting that you cannot respond to God's giving. Steep yourself in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. Don't worry about missing out. I love that Jesus knew about FOMO way back then. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. Or in a more familiar translation, perhaps, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Or maybe he'd just say this, you don't need $1 million, you just need to trust me. Let's pray. I want to lead you through a couple minutes of thinking about this. Where are you in terms of this? Because this is a really important thing. So I'm going to give you several things to think about as just sort of a guided prayer time. So first of all, where are you in terms of investing your actions to create your affections? Ask God about that. Where am I, God, in terms of acting in ways that would lead me towards kingdom values and priorities? Where are you with that? Secondly, how are you actively engaging with God to constantly retune your perspective to His? Are there habits of the spiritual life that you need to re-engage in or that you need to engage in for the first time? Are there things you need to be doing that will help to reset your perspective? Just ask God, where do you want me to be with that? Are there things I need to be doing that I haven't done or that I used to do? How do I re-engage, God, so that my perspective is where you want it to be? What kind of actions and activities can I be involved in? And then ultimately, what do I treasure? And what do I want to treasure? Jesus, you are good. Not good just morally, but just good. It's a good way to live with you and like you and to follow your ways. And so this morning, would you help us take some very real steps towards that? In Jesus' name, amen.